Thank you for coming here today. We are here to announce the recommendations of the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission. Standing with me today, I'll introduce everybody. We have Senator Ruth Hardy, Representative Martin Lalonde, Representative Angela Arsenault, Karen Tronsgaard-Scott, Sarah Robinson, and Charlie Parker Glisserman of the Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. We call the network often. Michelle Donnelly, who's the Washington County State's Attorney, Chief Sean Burke from the South Burlington Police Department, Heather Holter from the Vermont Council on Domestic Violence, Domenica Padula, the Chief of the Criminal Division in my office, Carolyn Hansen, who's the Assistant Attorney General I have appointed as chair of this commission and has filled that role for many years, and Armina Medic is here, no? Yes. Armina Medic is our truly amazing, ask anybody, victims advocate in our office. I want to particularly thank the 17 members of the commission who have worked tirelessly in dedication and thoughtfulness in creating this report and the recommendations we're here to talk about today. I want to note with special appreciation two retired members of the commission. The first is the Windham County State's Attorney Tracy Shriver, who served in that role for many, many years, as well as the Vermont State Police Major Dan Trudeau. So thank you to those folks. And I also want to thank especially the legislative leaders who are here today. Often the recommendations of this commission involve legislative work, and we are so fortunate to have many wonderful legislative leaders who are willing to put forth bills and work on recommendations to make them a reality. I want to tell you a little bit about this commission. The commission was established over 20 years ago by the legislature. They are tasked, it's a group of stakeholders from all different areas that overlap when it comes to domestic violence, and they are tasked with identifying trends and coming up with recommendations to address the problem of domestic violence in Vermont. I began my tenure as Attorney General 2 years ago in this room with a press conference making recommendations on domestic violence from the Commission's report then. As a new advocate addressing this issue, especially when I was first running for office, what I found is that many people did not associate public safety with domestic violence. But what we know is that domestic violence affects many, many Vermonters, and it is an epidemic that happens behind closed doors. Just by being here, doing this work, and talking about it, we are making progress. I want to point out some of the statistics. The commission reviewed 29 homicides that occurred in Vermont for the year 2023. 2023 was the year we focused on. 2024 was the actual year in which the work was done. And 7 of those 29 homicides related to domestic violence. Sometimes the person who died is the victim of the domestic violence. Sometimes it is the perpetrator of the domestic violence. And sometimes it is a bystander or a helper who's trying to help. All of those murders and deaths would be considered related to domestic violence and identified for investigation or a review by this commission. I want to reflect a little on the last time that we formally released this report. It was in 2022, 2 years ago, and practically every recommendation that was proposed was put in place. I'm incredibly proud of the many stakeholders who made that happen and worked hard to make that happen. Our work must continue until our homes and our relationships are free from domestic violence. And together, we can make great progress on this issue. And every year that we do our work, we're identifying ways that we can make improvements on this issue. I want to highlight for you a few of the key recommendations of this year's report. There's 4 of them, so we'll walk through. The first is addressing the access to firearms. Use of firearms remains the leading cause of death in domestic violence cases. 71% of the fatalities that the Commission reviewed this past year involved a firearm. In nearly every domestic violence homicide that the Commission reviews, there is a missed opportunity to address the responsible party's access to firearms. This doesn't even take into account the use of firearms in the home that are meant to intimidate, that are meant to threaten, or in some other way intimidate intimate partners. We need to do more to limit the access to firearms, both voluntarily and when legally permitted to do so involuntarily. So here's the recommendation. To accomplish this, it is the Commission's recommendation that the legislature take a deeper look at ways to enhance compliance with firearm surrender orders. We recommend specifically that the legislature create a study committee made up of law enforcement leaders, representatives from the judiciary, the Department of Corrections, family law practitioners, industry, advocates, and prosecutors. The second area that we want to talk about is two victim services positions for local law enforcement. Victims need and deserve support following a crisis, especially violent crimes. We now have victim support personnel in our state's attorney's offices, in my office, I introduce you to Armina, and in the Vermont State Police. For the past 2 years, the Commission has advocated for victim support personnel's positions to be created within local law enforcement agencies. This is especially important when the perpetrator of a domestic violence incident dies by suicide, because currently, when no criminal charges are filed, there is no victim support available from a prosecutor's office, but of course we know that the victim needs support and deserves support. So the recommendation is that 2 new regional victim advocate positions be created to work with municipal agencies, like members of the network, to ensure immediate and ongoing victim support in every domestic violence, homicide, or near homicide, and murder-suicide case, and not just in cases where there's a criminal charge pending. The third recommendation is an option to impose what's called accountability programming in a final relief from abuse order. An offender taking responsibility for their actions is an essential part of recovery for survivors and their households. And learning the tools to diffuse conflict and avoid harming loved ones is a vital way of decreasing the incidence of domestic violence. Though Vermont courts have broad discretion to impose requirements under a final relief from abuse order, they do not currently require accountability programming in domestic violence cases. The law does not prevent this, and many survivors report that programming to help their partner change behavior would be extremely helpful as part of the order to help prevent further abuse. The Commission agrees. Programming at an earlier stage, rather than imposed only after a criminal conviction, could potentially lessen the likelihood of further abuse. The specific recommendation is that the legislature amend the existing abuse prevention law to give courts explicit authority to impose a condition that a respondent engage in domestic violence accountability programming when a final relief from abuse order is granted. The last recommendation I want to highlight for you today is to expand the use of what's called a lethality assessment tool. Understanding risk is a key element in preventing harm. A lethality assessment is an evidence-based screening tool used easily and effectively to identify victims of intimate partner violence who are at the highest risk of being killed or seriously injured by their intimate partners. After an individual is screened with the tool, they are connected to local domestic violence resources and community supports. In 2023, the Vermont State Police committed to having troopers use this tool in every domestic violence case. Thank you to the State Police for this. We celebrate this work. The Commission recommends expanding this assessment statewide to local law departments. I would like to see them used by other first responders and other healthcare professionals as well. Our recommendation specifically is that the legislature provide meaningful support for statewide use of a lethality assessment tool as part of law enforcement response to every domestic violence incident, and that the network assist the Vermont Criminal Justice Council and local law enforcement agencies in identifying an effective lethality assessment protocol tool and identifying community advocacy organizations in each county that are willing to provide advocacy services when conducting a lethality assessment. We are now going to hear from 3 speakers, beginning with Senator Ruth Hardy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Attorney General Clark. And I first just want to say, I don't have that much to say, except for I want to first really express my gratitude to the Commission for all of their work and the important recommendations in this report. I also want to thank law enforcement and the Network Against Domestic Violence for their work in this, putting together this report. And especially I want to thank Attorney General Clark for making this issue something that we are actually holding a press conference about in the State House. Before she was Attorney General, this issue did not get this level of attention in the State House, and we weren't holding press conferences on how we can reduce domestic violence and highlighting the recommendations of this important commission. So thank you so much for making sure that this topic gets the type of attention that it deserves. And thank you all for being here to cover it. I want to highlight, the Attorney General just highlighted two of the recommendations, and there are two that are particularly important to me, and I want to make sure that they are highlighted again, underscored. I have done a lot of work as in my 6 years in the Senate and previously as well on domestic and sexual violence prevention and awareness. It is an incredibly important issue in our state, and as you can see, many of the homicides in our state are directly the result of domestic violence. The first is to highlight the recommendation that the Attorney General already highlighted regarding access to firearms. We need to do more to make sure that people understand how to create opportunities to voluntarily, or if possible, if permitted legally, involuntarily remove firearms in situations where domestic violence is imminent or a threat. And we have to acknowledge the connection between domestic violence and self-harm and suicide. A lot of people who express self-harm or suicidal ideations that can be a precursor to domestic violence situations, and we need to make sure that people are aware of those, especially when a firearm is involved. The second, as a senator who represents an institution of higher education, I want to highlight the recommendation regarding college students and ensure that confidential advocacy for college students who may be experiencing partner-related violence is available to college students. And also that college students who may not be living in the community that they're familiar with have access to and knowledge of local resources to access if they are in a situation with partner violence on campus. So those are really important recommendations, and I am committed to working with my colleagues in the legislature to implement all of the recommendations that are put forth in this report, just as we did 2 years ago. I was proud to be part of that work, and I look forward to doing that again. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Michelle Donnelly, the Washington County State's Attorney.
I want to reiterate the thanks to Attorney General Clark for having us all here today for this press conference to celebrate the work that the committee put into this report and to push forward the recommendations for them during this legislative session. The pieces that I want to focus on are about that lethality assessment protocol tool. Right now, the state police is using that tool, and they're using it to great effect when that protocol is used in instances of domestic violence, whether they be misdemeanor assaults that occur in a home. Sometimes they're used in cruelty to child cases or in felony domestic assault cases that don't rise to the level of a fatality. Those lethality assessment protocol tools gather essential information that allow me as the prosecutor to evaluate what the risk is and to have an appropriate response for interventions at that time. And those interventions can be crucial in making sure that that violence in that relationship gets that risk addressed and that we don't see it at the Fatality Review. And so that is a key recommendation, and the funding for that type of training to be able to choose a protocol tool and then to be able to use it the way that it's designed as an evidence-based tool is crucial. So I would really encourage the legislature to provide the appropriate resources to make sure that this lethality assessment protocol tool is available to every police officer that is going to be investigating any act of domestic violence. And the second piece that I would like to highlight is the recommendation for the option to impose domestic violence accountability programming in a final relief from abuse order. These final relief from abuse orders belong to the harmed party. These relief from abuse orders are filed by that person. It occurs in the civil court, in the family jurisdiction, and the person who has been harmed owns that piece of litigation. They are the named plaintiff, and they are the ones that can make requests about what conditions are put into those orders, how long those orders are in place, when those orders need modifications, and when those orders are able to be rescinded. It's an incredibly empowering tool for a plaintiff in that family court context to have. And this piece to engage in the domestic violence accountability program has been a consistent request by plaintiffs that are in that system who say, this is what I want to see happen after this harm. And I believe that giving family courts this option can create another off-ramp so that we don't see them in the criminal court. If a plaintiff is able to get what they need from that civil court process, the hope is that can be addressed there and doesn't need to become a criminal court case, and that the violence is stopped at that risk of abuse stage and doesn't rise to the level of an actual crime being occurred. So those are the two pieces that I would specifically encourage the legislature to focus on this session.
Thank you. And finally, we will hear from Karen Tronsgaard-Scott of the Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence.
Thank you, A.G. Clark. Thank you, Attorney General Clark, for your words today and for your undying dedication to this issue and to our fellow Vermonters who are experiencing this terrible, terrible condition. I also want to thank you for your support of the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission. You are a steadfast supporter of that group. It's an important group. Much of the work of this commission happens behind closed doors. Commissioners conduct in-depth interviews and reviews of cases. They hear stories from surviving family members and first responders, as well as others from the community. These stories help us understand and learn from tragedy to improve our responses to domestic violence. We know that domestic violence remains a leading public safety issue and public health challenge in Vermont. Last year, our member organizations, 15 nonprofit organizations that provide 24-hour services every day of the week, every night of the week, continuously answered over 22,000 hotline calls from survivors, from our fellow Vermonters who are seeking support. It's our job to work together to address this issue, which touches Vermonters in every single community in our state. We will never solve the issue of domestic violence thinking about this issue as one person, one incident. We have to do it together. We can do this by supporting victims and survivors, intervening earlier to change the behavior of people who use harm in their relationships, and improving the way our systems respond. And that is the key work of this commission. The recommendations released today are an important step forward in this direction, and we deeply, deeply appreciate not only the work of the commission. These folks are tireless and serious and sober in their approach to learning all they need to learn in making these recommendations. It is incredibly difficult work, as you can imagine, but we also want to recognize the incredibly courageous survivors of these homicides, survivors, family members who are living with this issue, who come forward and share their stories with the commission and help shape the future. Thank you so much.
I want to close by emphasizing that people experiencing domestic violence should know that there are resources available right now. They can call the network at 800-228-7395. And now I would love to open it up for questions for me or anyone else who's up here.
Are there specific appropriations associated with each of these requests?
I don't think we have a specific number, but the victims' advocates' positions would be a specific dollar amount. Also, when there is a study committee, there's usually a small dollar amount associated with that. Anything else? All right, we will link to the full report in the press release that Amelia will be sending out, so you'll be able to have that. It's very well written. Yay, Carolyn and the rest of the commission. And I think it's really easily laid out, so you might give that a look before you write your stories. But we're happy to answer any other questions you might have. I'll linger for a little bit. Thank you so much for being here.